Welcome back. You're watching Late Agenda, and I'd like to welcome to the panel, it's really more of an interview than a panel, the Shadow Assistant Treasurer, Matthias Cormann. Thanks for your company.
Good to be here.
And from the Australian Financial Review, Jennifer Hewett. Thanks for your company as well. Let me ask you, Senator Cormann, right off the bat, are you embarrassed at having had Peter Slipper as a colleague for so long and having him pre-selected so many times?
Well, Peter Slipper was on his way out of the Parliament. He was about to lose his pre-selection, which is, of course, why he was ripe for the picking for a desperate Prime Minister who made him the Speaker. So, I mean, really, Peter Slipper is very much Julia Gillard's problem, and Julia Gillard has yet again demonstrated her lack of judgment.
Do you think he would have been deselected at the 2010 election if it hadn't been for the grandfathering to get the LNP agreement through in Queensland?
Well, I mean, that is now conjecture looking backwards, but what we do know is that he was not going to win the next Liberal Party pre-selection, and that Julia Gillard, who clearly is a weak Prime Minister who is out of her depth and who leads a divided, dysfunctional government which lacks integrity. She was desperate to somehow bolster her numbers, and she would have done anything, including putting Peter Slipper in the speakership, despite all of the reservations that were around at the time.
So, Senator, let's get this right. You're saying really that he should step aside. The government's saying that Tony Abbott's sounding more like the leader of a lynch mob than of a Liberal Party.
Well, Peter Slipper did stand aside, and not because of anything that the government has done. I mean, the two most senior ministers in the government were out there defending Peter Slipper, and Peter Slipper, actually, to his credit, did the right thing yesterday afternoon in standing aside.
After a conversation with Mr. Albanese.
Well, I mean, which we're not allowed to know about. Now, I mean, the truth of the matter is, Peter Slipper should have stood aside. He did the right thing there, but he should stand aside from the speakership until both the criminal allegations and the sexual harassment allegations are both resolved.
If he's cleared, should he come back into the role, or do you think it's one of those things where if enough mud's been thrown, the institution of Speaker, despite his innocence under those circumstances, should still be free from that kind of taint?
Well, let's cross that bridge when we get there, and there certainly is the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. But, I mean, these are very serious allegations. And, I mean, these are both serious allegations in terms of the criminal allegations and the allegations of having defrauded the Commonwealth under entitlements, but also the sexual harassment allegations. Listening to the Prime Minister and senior ministers in the government, it seems as if they're not as concerned about the sexual harassment allegations, suggesting that Peter Slipper could come back in a couple of weeks, as long as the entitlement issues have been resolved.
Yeah, well, what happens if he is back there in a couple of weeks? What does the opposition do?
Well, I mean, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Right now, this is a question for the Prime Minister. I mean, the Prime Minister should actually show some leadership in relation to this issue. She has now got Peter Slipper, that is a Speaker of her making, who's got serious allegations, criminal allegations and sexual harassment allegations hanging over his head. And we've got, of course, Craig Thomson, who still has got some serious unresolved issues hanging over his head too. Incidentally, the government is telling us that this criminal investigation to Peter Slipper can be resolved in a couple of weeks. Remember that this Fair Work Australia investigation to Craig Thomson has now been going for more than 3 years. How is it that Julia Gillard is so confident that the AFP investigation, which is supposed to be independent and at arm's length from the government, how is it that she's so confident that this can be resolved within a couple of weeks when the Fair Work Australia investigation to Craig Thomson has been going for more than 3 years?
But if he is cleared, and given the level of uncertainty, you know, in the government and in a hung parliament, do you accept that it's in the government's interest and that it's a reasonable thing to say, look, the Speaker should stay in the Speaker's role? I mean, if you have that level of Anna Burke staying there for, you know, indefinitely for months, won't that just kind of add to the whole uncertainty and instability of the Parliament?
Well, this process has to be allowed to run its course, and while this process runs its course, and while these allegations remain unresolved, Peter Slipper should continue to stand aside from the speakership. And of course, the point that we're making, that this does not only apply to the criminal allegations in relation to breaching or Commonwealth entitlements, it also relates to the sexual harassment allegations that are made in the context of formal court proceedings.
Senator, we've had a tweet come in that says, Matthias the Terminator Cormann, a future PM for sure. Any interest in the lower house?
I'm very, very happy where I am, and we've got a fine leader who's going to make a fine Prime Minister. I'm just a humble senator from Western Australia who wants to make a contribution as part of the team.
All right, well, part of your humble role is as Assistant Shadow Treasurer. Now, what are you expecting in the lead-up to budget? Joe Hockey out of London, you know, you could be cynical and think that he wanted to say this from as far away as possible. He went over there and he talked about the age of entitlement. Now, does that mean that we're going to see cuts under a coalition government into entitlements in this country?
Well, let's just look at where we are. We've had a government which over the last 4 years has delivered 4 successive deficit budgets, $167 billion worth of accumulated deficits. They've taken our budget position from a position of no government net debt to now a situation where we're heading for $133 billion worth of net debt. Like, the point I'm about to make here, Peter, is that governments do have to live within their means. This is a government that has failed to live within its means every single year that it has delivered a budget. Before the election, we were told that the deficit this financial year would be $10.4 billion. It is now it is now set to be in excess of $40 billion. That is a $30 billion blowout in the budget deficit this financial year.
Senator, if they're going to get to surplus, or they're going to predict that they'll get to surplus, if they actually do achieve it, is ending the age of entitlement just as simple as sticking to those surpluses?
Well, I mean, the government will use every single accounting trick in the book to make it look like they're going to have a surplus in 2012-13, but we won't actually know what they actually deliver in terms of budget outcome until late in 2013, conveniently after the next election, presumably. So the issue here is every single budget prediction that this government has made has turned out to be false. If you look at last financial year, the budget position deteriorated by more than $8 billion from when we were told the deficit would be about $41 billion to when it actually was just short of $50 billion. This financial year, we've had a deterioration in the budget deficit of more than $30 billion already. And the government wants us to believe that somehow in 2012-13, what they tell us at budget time is what they're going to be delivering 18 months later. I don't believe it.
But Senator, a lot of economists are saying that, in fact, given that there's going to be this Herculean effort to get to surplus, whether or not you believe it, there'll obviously be a lot of cuts in the budget, and that many people suggest, both in the business community as well as some economists, that this is actually, given the weakness in the non-resources part of the economy, this is actually going to pound the economy further than it should be in a short period of time. Do you disagree with that entirely?
Well, I mean, the first point to make here is that very often when Labor talks about making cuts, what they're actually doing is increasing taxes. And of course, what we've had over the last 4 budgets is 20 new or increased Labor Party taxes. And despite us being in a situation where we've got the best terms of trade in 140 years, despite us being in a situation where Labor has introduced 20 new or increased taxes, they're still not able to balance the books. Government should be able to live within its means. If we can't live within our means at a time when we've got the best terms of trade in 140 years, when are we going to live within our means?
But if you're not going to increase taxes in government, that means surely that you're going to have far more savage cuts along the lines that Joe Hockey was suggesting.
Well, there's no doubt that in government we will spend less so that we can tax less. We will also cut red tape so that our productivity growth will accelerate again, because we want to grow the economy more strongly. Because something that the coalition understands and what Labor does not understand is that when you grow the economy, not only does it increase economic prosperity for us as a nation, it actually also increases government revenue without the need to increase taxes or introduce new taxes. And so our focus is on a government that spends less, that taxes less, that increases productivity growth, that increases our economy, that grows our economy more strongly, so that we can actually collect more revenue for government without the need for extra taxes.
Well, it all sounds good in theory. Much harder to deliver.
Well, we have actually done it in practice. I mean, we have a track record in government of having delivered it in practice.
Different personnel, though, Senator. I mean, in government you delivered it with John Howard, retired, Peter Costello, retired, Alexander Downer, retired, Nick Minchin, finance, retired.
Well, I would put it to you, and people across Australia instinctively know that whenever Labor gets into government, they stuff up our public finances, and it always comes down to the coalition.
You disagree?
Paul Keating left a $96 billion debt, and it always comes down to the coalition to fix up the Labor Party mess, and whether that is at a federal level or at a state level, people across Australia instinctively know that Labor cannot manage money, and it always comes down to the coalition to fix up the Labor Party mess.
You talked a lot about productivity, and yet the coalition has been extremely shy about saying what they're going to do to change the industrial relations system. You still burned, obviously, from the Howard experience and work choices. Why are you so reluctant to even utter the words individual contracts?
Well, we're not shy at all. What we've said is that we will have a strong and effective workplace relations policy, which we will release in the lead up to the next election.
That's just rhetoric. Is it already written and sitting there ready to go?
Well, I mean, obviously, policy development is an ongoing process. I mean, clearly there are now examples out there where the workplace relations arrangement put in place by the Rudd-Gillard governments are not working well in our economy. And I mean, even the government recognises it, because even the Labor government is conducting a review and is proposing to make some changes. Now, the point that we're making is that any change that a coalition government will make to our workplace relations arrangements will be based on fixing problems, not based on ideology. We are committed to...
Why is that? I mean, ideology is important. I remember a time when politicians used to proudly stand by ideology. Now it seems like it's a dirty word.
Well, we're focused on making things better, and to the extent that there are problems, we will fix them. And of course, the workplace relations arrangement are an important part of an overall productivity agenda, and in the lead up to the next election, everybody will have ample time to have a very good look at what our policy is going to be.
But in the meantime, it seems, Senator, that the Liberal Party is making hay because they can just keep pointing to the government and criticising it for all the errors that it's made and not actually have to say anything.
That's our job.
But it's also your job eventually to, I think, and the public are saying, well, fine, but the Liberal Party doesn't stand for anything other than being not the Labor Party.
Well, that's not right. I mean, we're actually doing both things at the same time. We are holding a bad government to account. We're scrutinising a bad government, and we're also preparing a plan for better government after the next election, an election which we think should happen sooner rather than later, incidentally. I mean, Australians surely deserve better than what they're getting from this incompetent, dysfunctional and divided government.
One final question before we let you go, though, Senator. I mean, I understand that you want an election as soon as possible, and then if an election's called and you get the mandatory 4 or so weeks, you will then release a raft of policies that presumably are close, if not already ready to go. But the opposition wants more than that. You would be happy to see a change in the current parliament if the independents switch their support to the opposition.
No, that's not right, Peter. We want an election. I mean, we certainly think that there is a question.
So you would reject the independents if they offered that?
There is a question for the independents, and the question is this: how bad do things have to go for our country before they actually make a judgment that enough is enough?
You and I both know. But you and I both know, Senator, that these independents, particularly Oakeshott and Windsor, for pure self-interest, if nothing else,
they should
are not going to want an election because they'll lose their seats.
Yeah, but that's not good enough. It is actually time that the independents started to focus on the national interest and not just on their own self-interest.
But the opposition wouldn't accept their votes if they switched sides?
What we've said is if the independents take the view that it's time for this government to go, then it is time for us to go to an election. And the independents know that. And of course, I mean, we will not be making a change in this current parliament. We want an election, and we want the Australian people to have the opportunity to pass judgment on this government and on us as an alternative government which has a better program for Australia.
All right, Senator Matthias Cormann, Shadow Assistant Treasurer and Shadow Spokesperson for Financial Services. We appreciate you joining us on Late Agenda.
I'll be back.
With that terminated